In this example, we're going to find the 6 trigonometric function values of negative 10 pi over 3. And remember the first thing, whoa, what happened here? Sorry, I went into shape. Remember the first thing that we want to do when we're working on these, get off this function, sorry, is we want to sketch the angle. And this will give us a good idea in terms of what quadrant it's in. So that will tell us what the signs of our trigonometric value should be. And it will also give us a good idea as to what our reference angle is. So when we go to sketch t is equal to negative 10 pi over 3, two things. Number one, it's in terms of radians. Number two, it's negative. So it's in terms of radians means that we're going to start over here at 0. And then we're going to go pi over 2 around the unit circle. And because it's negative, we're going to go in a clockwise manner. So we have 2, 0, pi over 2, pi, 3 pi over 2, and then 2 pi. Again, just consider these all to be negative because we're going in that clockwise manner. Now, notice negative 10 pi over 3 is an improper fraction, so we want to get an idea as to what it's equivalent to as a mixed number. 3 goes into 10 3 times. With a remainder of 1. So this is the same thing as saying that we traveled negative 3 1/3 pi's around the unit circle. So let's do that. Let's travel negative 3 1/3 pi's around the unit circle, and let's figure out in which quadrant that our angle is going to terminate. So we'll sketch our angle over here in green. So we're starting here at 0. Let's go, first of all, negative pi. So this is negative 1 pi, negative 2 pi's, negative 3 pi. So we just traveled a negative 3 pi's, and have to travel 1/3 more in that direction, which means we're right over here in quadrant 2. Okay, so here is our angle over here in quadrant 2. So that's step 1 of the process in finding the exact trig values, is sketching the angle. Now step 2 is let's find our reference angle. So our reference angle, hopefully you can see this is going to be our reference angle right here. This is the shortest distance to get back to the x-axis from over here. Now this over here is 1/3 of a pi, right? Because remember we traveled 1 pi, 2 pi, 3 1/3. So this is 1/3 of a pi to get back to the x-axis, which tells us that our reference angle is pi over 3, 1/3 of a pi, which is the same thing as saying pi over 3. So we have a reference angle of pi over 3. And again, remember what we use our reference angle for. We're going to use our reference angle to help us figure out what our terminal point is. So knowing that we have a reference angle of pi over 3, that's telling us that we have a terminal point at the ordered pair 1/2 square root of 3 over 2. Now, step 3 in our process of finding the exact trig values is now we have to look at the quadrant we're in and say something about the signs. Because we're in quadrant 2, we know that our x values are negative. And our y values are positive. So that means we're going to rewrite our terminal point using the proper signs. So really, our terminal point is negative 1/2 square root of 3 over 2. What that means is, assuming that we're on the unit circle here, and I'll do this in black, this ordered pair over here terminates at negative 1/2 square root of 3 over 2. All right. Once you have your terminal point, once you have the terminal order pair, then you can find your trigonometric functions fairly easily. Just make sure that you recall the definitions. So let's start off with the sine of negative 10 pi over 3. And remember that the sine is the same thing as saying the y value of the order pair, so we have square root of 3 over 2. The cosine of negative 10 pi over 3 is the x value of the order pair, which is negative 1/2. The tangent of negative 10 pi over 3 is equal to the square root of 3 over 2 divided by negative 1/2, which is the same thing as negative square root of 3. So real quickly for this proof, take a look. I'll put this off to the side over here. We can rewrite this as the square root of 3 over 2 divided by negative 1/2. And remember, when you divide fractions, you multiply by the reciprocal. So this is the same thing as saying this. These two cancel, and we have a positive times a negative, which is a negative. So there's y that's equal to negative square root of 3. Let's find the 3 other trigonometric values. So if sine of negative 10 pi over 3 is the square root of 3 over 2, the cosecant of negative 10 pi over 3 is equal to 1 divided by the y value. So 1 divided by the square root of 3 over 2, which is the same thing as saying 2 over the square root of 3. And then remember that this is not in simplified radical form. We can't have any radicals in the denominator. So we're going to multiply the numerator and the denominator by the square root of 3 over 3. And we get 2 square root of 3 over 3. For the secant of negative 10 pi over 3, the secant is 1 divided by the x value. So it's 1 divided by negative 1/2, which is the same thing as saying negative 2. And then for the cotangent of negative 10 pi over 3, that's the same thing as saying the x value divided by the y value. So initially we get negative 1 over the square root of 3, multiply the numerator and denominator by the square root of 3 over the square root of 3, and that gives us negative square root of 3 over 3 is the cotangent. Okay, so here are our 6 trigonometric values of negative 10 pi over 3.